This example demonstrates the tiered pricing capability of the generic pricing script. By enabling tier pricing, the administrator can ensure that different prices can be utilized depending on the quantity of a product ordered. For example, purchasing one of a product configuration may be a different price per unit than purchasing 10 of them or 50 of them. Tier pricing allows us to factor in this change in price based on quantity. So the first thing I want to show you here is a sample product which is available for you to use as a reference. So I've created a storefront which has a few examples of pricing scripts in action. You can get to this just by going to training.infigosoftware.com/pricing scripts. And for this particular tutorial, it's product number 3, which is the tier pricing script. So this sample product it's got a description of the purpose of the product. It's got the configuration of the pricing script, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. It's got a visual version of the CSV that's utilized for this particular product, so you can see the data that's been fed into the background. And right at the bottom, it's got a functional version of that pricing script in action. So you're able to choose the relevant configurations of the two attributes and pull in an appropriate price. Okay, so next up, let's take a look at the CSV format that's utilized for this particular product. Again, you can see an example of it on the actual product itself, but we'll take a look at the actual CSV document. So the CSV has been formatted with multiple rows for each attribute combination. So you see, for example, that I've got a row here which looks at A1 and B1, but then further down, I've got another row that's dealing with the same combination, so A1 and B1. What changes between these two rows is the quantity value, which could then mean a change in the unit price. Once we eventually activate tier pricing, the system knows that any quantity requested by the customer will sit within one of those defined brackets. So using the data in this CSV as an example, if we call a price for A1B1, if we look for a quantity of 8, that sits within this bracket here because the next bracket starts at 10. So that means it will be £2 per unit. If we're looking for a quantity of 25, then it's going to be using this particular row here because the next bracket up is a quantity of 50. So that means that it's £1.60 per unit. And then if we're looking at a quantity of 70, that's above our maximum specified tier here. So it knows that it'll be utilizing the maximum, which will be this one, which means it's £1.20 per unit. So of course we have to upload this CSV to our global additional data area, which we've seen in previous tutorials. Assuming that we've performed that task already, we actually need to configure this capability on a product level. So I'm just going to go back to our product variant settings for that particular product. You can see that we've enabled the generic pricing script as we've seen in previous tutorials. And if I open out this configuration box a bit, you can see that there's a few lines being utilized in there in order to configure this tier pricing. So as a reminder, we only need to enter lines within the pricing script configuration box, which we wish to change from the default script configuration shown in the blue box below it. So in this particular example, a few entries are required. So we need the file path entry. So this needs to identify the CSV to utilize from our global additional data area. We've got quantity column name. So this identifies the column containing quantity data within the CSV via the column header name. So you can see there we've registered it as quantity, and that matches with our CSV header. We've also got use tier price. Now this is simply a true or false value specifying how to utilize the data from the CSV. So if we've got true specified here, then it will use the tier pricing configuration that we've been discussing. Then the final line we've got here is just to activate the debug mode. So this isn't specifically necessary for the tier pricing. This is just going to give us some additional information when we start testing this particular setup. So with all that information input and saved, we can now click on Test. Now, test mode runs the default configuration of the product within the admin area itself and provides feedback on the data that's returned from it. In order to be able to utilize this, you do need a default configuration which is expected to return a price. So for example, you may have to specify pre-selected attribute values so that it actually knows where to look in the CSV document. So if I click Test, you see there's loads of information that appears at the top of the screen to show us how that particular script is being run in that particular scenario. And because we've got the debug mode activated, we get much more information than we otherwise would. But then, of course, as we saw a couple of minutes ago, if we go to View Product page, we can actually take a look at that in action. So if I choose different configurations of the attributes, I get a certain price. But then if I start playing around with the quantity, it will pull the modified price data from that CSV.